Good evening, students. I welcome you all to the lecture of Advanced 3G and 4G Mobile Wireless Communication. The topic for today is Ultra Wideband Communication 2. As we have already discussed the block diagram and various modules of ultra wideband transmission in comparison to the conventional transmission, now this is in continuation to that lecture in which we have already discussed the basics of ultra wideband transmission and ultra wideband communication. So when we talk about ultra wideband communication, we have discussed that a block diagram of ultra wideband communication is simple and less complex in comparison to the general general communication setup. So this lecture is all about the feature of ultra wideband communication. So each and every technology has got some advantage so that it is able to replace the conventional one, the old one. So in case of ultra wideband communication system 2, surely there are some advantages by which the ultra wideband communication provide edge over other technologies. The main advantages of ultra wideband communication are, as we have discussed in the earlier lecture as well, that its ability to share spectrum. FCC has provided a band, so that the transmission of ultra wideband signal can be executed. The condition is that the power level should be less than minus 41.3 dBm per megahertz, which is almost equal to 75 nanowatt per megahertz. So such low power level at a very wide band is possible in case of ultra wideband transmission. So when there is such a low power level, surely it won't interfere with the regular communication system, with the regular communication services and radio services. So ultra wideband communication setup is able to share the spectrum with other narrowband and CDMA or other radio services. As it can be seen in the figure as well, that the ultra wideband transmission, it shares the spectrum with other narrowband and other radio services. So coexistence of ultra wideband with the radio frequency spectrum is possible. This is the first advantage. Second advantage, we have discussed the second advantage in the earlier lecture as well, that when we take the Shannon-Hartley theorem of capacity, that capacity is linked to bandwidth. It is linearly proportional to capacity is linearly linked to bandwidth. So when the bandwidth of ultra wideband signal is very high, so obviously we are able to achieve the gigabits per second or Gbps data rate in case of ultra wideband transmission. So this is the second advantage of ultra wideband transmission. The third advantage is to ability to work with low signal to noise ratio. Again, if we take this formula of Shannon capacity theorem, you can easily see that capacity is linked to SNR. But if the bandwidth is very high, we can just compensate low SNR in order to achieve high capacity rate. The fourth very important advantage of ultra wideband communication system is low probability of interception and detection. So if we want to intercept and detect the information, it is very difficult in case of ultra wideband transmission. Having low transmission power, since the ultra wideband communication has very low transmission power, therefore it is immune to detection and interception. Ultra wideband pulses are time modulated and extremely narrow pulse, which added to security because detecting a picosecond pulse without knowing where it is arrived in a very large bandwidth is almost impossible. So this is the fourth advantage of ultra wideband transmission, that it has a very low probability of interception and detection. So it is very secure type of communication. Next advantage is that it is resistance to jamming. We know that enemy generally use jammers so that a radar is not able to detect the plane. So this is the basic phenomenon of jammer, is to provide the wrong signal, or is to so that a radar antenna is not able to detect the enemy plane properly. The ultra wideband cover a very large spectrum. It has a very broad bandwidth. Therefore, it offers a high processing gain. High processing gains means a ratio of RF bandwidth to the information bandwidth. Since the RF bandwidth in case of ultra wideband signal is very high, therefore frequency diversity makes ultra wideband relatively resistant to unintentional or intentional jamming, as if some frequencies are jammed, information can be sent by other frequencies by other methodology. As the frequency spectrum is very high, the information is spread to a very large spectrum. Therefore, it is quite impossible to jam a radar or to jam a system for a particular frequency. I'm just using an example of a radar in order to give you a small interpretation that how does a jammer work, or how does a jammer basically exhibit its role in communication. So the next very important advantage of ultra wideband transmission is high performance in multipath system. As it is very clear to you that there are basically two types of communication, that is line of sight communication and non line of sight communication, that is through reflection, refraction of various interfacing objects. So to give you the brief overview, due to reflections there is phase change, and obviously due to the phase change there is decrease in the value of amplitude. So since the duration of ultra wideband pulse is very small, therefore it is less sensitive to multipath effect, because the transmission duration is extremely short and the opportunity to collide with the collision of line of sight with non line of sight is next to impossible. Therefore, there is very less possibility of signal degradation due to mixing of line of sight and non line of sight communication. Again, there is another advantage that is called a spheral penetration property. As it is known to you that frequency is a very important component if we talk about skin depth. Therefore, since the ultra wideband consists of a broad range of frequencies, the lower frequencies can penetrate to a deeper depth. Therefore, this property is successful on a very low frequency range. Again, there is another advantage of ultra wideband transmission, ultra wideband communication system, is that a transceiver of ultra wideband transmission is very less complicated. It's simple, and since we does not require any carrier, we does not require any modulation. Therefore, the architecture is very simple. Again, since we are dealing with low power level, therefore we doesn't require power amplifier in case of block diagram of ultra wideband transmission. So this is all about the advantages of ultra wideband communication system over the conventional communication system. I hope you will like this lecture. I request you to kindly take this lecture in extension to the lecture that we have already discussed and deliberated in the last class. So in continuation of these two video lectures, I hope you will be able to understand the basics of ultra wideband transmission, its effect and its advantages. I thank you all for listening. Thank you very much, students.